some new software we're going to get to try out from WebEx, so that's going to make life interesting, we're sure, but it's really going to be a good session here. We're glad you're with us. I want to remind you of a couple of housekeeping items before it begins, before our official program begins. Please use our chat box for questions or communications during the webinar today, and we're going to be monitoring that throughout the webinar. And when we get to the questions and comments after we have a lot of reports here, we're going to be using the chat box for those as well. We're right at the beginning, so we're going to go on and officially get started. So it's my pleasure to pass our program over to our moderator today, who is our outgoing president for the Council of State Archivists, and that'll be Tim Baker. So Tim, you may take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary Margaret. Welcome, one and all. I'm so pleased that you could be with us today. Thank you for tuning in. As Mary Margaret said, I'm Tim Baker, the immediate past president of the CoSA Board of Directors. And let me first say what an absolute pleasure it was for me to serve. It made pleasurable really by the great contributions and energy and support of my fellow board members, most of whom you'll hear from later on in this webinar. We had a great week in Washington, D.C. Last year as part of our joint meeting and our annual, part of the joint conference and our annual meeting. We're going to talk about just some of what we did. I have with me, as I said today, many of the CoSA members who will report on the activities of the various CoSA committees. But before we get started, I thought I'd just give a brief outline of a couple of the really outstanding items that we participated in this past week. And we'll cover a little bit more of those later on in the program. But on Tuesday, we had a great session that we called Archives on the Hill that Jim Corden coordinated as part of our advocacy program. Wednesday, we had a great series of meetings with the National Archives, and the highlight of the week, at least for me, was we were able to have our member dinner and award ceremony in the rotunda of the National Archives, and that was just an incredible and awe-inspiring time. To start off, we'll have our new incoming president, John Dugan, introduce our new board members, to be followed by our immediate past Secretary-Treasurer, Steve Murray, who will provide a financial report. Then I will have the pleasure of letting you know about our award recipients this year, to be followed by reports on our advocacy, development, education, SERI, and our sustainability efforts. And then we'll also talk a little bit about those special event days that I just mentioned a minute ago. So again, thank you for joining with us today. I'm going to turn it over to my friend and President John Dugan.
Thank you, Tim. And officially, I want to thank you, Tim, for such great leadership. The year you were president, as you've been on the board for several years now, I want to thank you for everything you've done for CoSA and the outgoing board members as well for their help. And can we advance to the next slide? The slate of officers that were presented by the nominating committee for this year were David Cheever, the Maine State Archivist, Steve Excel for the Washington State Archivist, and Sean Rounds, who is the Archivist for the state of Minnesota, and myself for a one-year term as I served as president. And that slate of officers was elected, so we're thrilled to have such good continuing board members on the board, and also these new board members that bring a lot to what we do. On the next slide, we did at the meeting formally elect the officers, and so I was elected president, and Jody Foley from Montana was elected in the Vice President, President-elect slot, and Eric Emerson will be taking over as our Secretary-Treasurer from South Carolina. So we're glad to have that slate of officers and look forward to working with the Executive Committee. And one final thank you, but not it's going to be difficult to replace Steve Murray as our treasurer, and so Steve is going to give us the treasurer's report
now. John, I appreciate that. And as I rotate off the CoSA board, I want to say how much I've enjoyed serving on the board and encourage our other members to seek opportunities to participate in CoSA committees or on the board of directors at some point. It's been a really rewarding experience. If we can go to the next slide. You have on the screen before you now a financial report showing our statement of financial position for the years 2015, 16, and 17, plus a column showing 2018 year to date. So that's a partial report. The main column we want to focus on is the 2017 numbers. And you can see that CoSA's in good health. We're always looking for ways to increase revenue, and certainly the ambitious sustainability plan that the membership approved in 2017 at our annual meeting calls for CoSA to continue to seek to diversify its revenue streams and to seek to increase across the board where possible our revenue so that we can continue to support the great programming that CoSA manages and to even grow into some areas that we've identified as important strategic initiatives. So here, what we're looking at is under our assets. You can see there the first gray line under 2017, that first section of the chart is showing you basically what we have in hand in the way of cash and other deposits, totaling $142,629. The next section there is showing the value of some assets, property and equipment, and as well as the CoSA website make up that number. You can see there an initial figure of $82,000 that has depreciated some over the years, showing a net value at the end of 2017 of $11,496. That's not real money. That's the value of other resources that CoSA owns. The next line is our investment account, and the value of that at the end of 2017 was $108,159. Taking you down to the very bottom being the total assets of $262,284. While I'm here, go back up to the investment line, that 108 balance, and then move to the right one cell, and you can see that at the end of July, our investment account was at $135,421. Some of that is very good growth that we're benefiting from in the stock market, but it's also, that increase is also due to additional cash transfers into the investment account that the CoSA has been making in the first half of 2018. While we continue to see good growth in the stock market, we have been at a gradual rate transferring amounts into that investment account over the first 6 months of the year. The Finance Committee, which will now be headed up by Eric Emerson from South Carolina, will continue to monitor that and make recommendations to the board on whether we continue to make other cash transfers into the investment account moving forward. One other thing that I should also mention before we go to the next slide, this also reflects of course, up in the cash section, all of the various accounts that CoSA maintains. In 2018, of course, we have been managing this transition of the Executive Director's Office from New York to Kentucky, and just want to commend both Ann Ackerson and Barbara Teague for their work in making that process a smooth one and handling a lot of moving pieces involving our financial situation, but as a group, we have all worked really hard together, and Eric's been part of that as well in making sure that we get new accounts set up properly, and we're in a very good situation with a new bookkeeper who has a strong background in public accounting, who is located nearby, near Barbara, and in Frankfurt there, and is keeping a good eye on all of CoSA's assets. We can move on to the next slide unless there are any questions. The liabilities, again, we're looking at the third column there showing what our liabilities are for 2017. The middle section there shows the difference between our unrestricted and board designated funds. So we have an unrestricted operating balance of $145,975, and then the board designated funds are those funds that make up our reserve fund and the Walsh Leadership Fund, award fund rather, that make up that $101,000, and those total to $247,566 for our total assets. We can move on to the next slide. This is our activity report for the same years, and this is showing where our income comes from and where it's going. One figure I would point out, the very first one, you can see we were down a little bit in 2017 in our member contributions, but we've really rallied in 2018 and aren't through with the year yet. So it's looking to be a very good year this year for member contributions, and we're grateful for everyone being diligent about paying your memberships. Back under the 2017 column, you can see other contributions of just under $71,000, grant revenue that's come in, and some other smaller figures, giving us a total of $276,000. The second half of that screen shows you our expenses, dividing program services and management and general operations at $189,000 and $75,000 respectively there. In 2017, we had an increase in net assets of just under $11,000. And if you look back to the left from that figure, you can see that we've had a good track record over the last 3 years of growth in our net assets from year to year. A word about 2018, we knew going into 2018 that we were going to dip into some of our reserves to help cover the costs of relocating the executive director's office. We are running a budget for 2018 that was created with a deficit of about $10,000 in it, knowing that that was going to be needed to be sure we had a smooth transition and some one-time costs associated with that. But we think that our continued work on the development front and continued good stewardship from our membership will allow us to move into make that hopefully a one-time event of operating in the red a little bit in 2018. But as you can see from these other balances that we've already reviewed, CoSA's in good shape and able to carry that transition year in a good way. And with that, Mr. President, I will conclude the financial report.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for your great service as Secretary-Treasurer and to the board. I would also like to thank, if we could go to the next slide, please. I'd also like to thank our CoSA Awards Program Committee from this past year. John Dugan chaired the committee. It was he was assisted by Sean Rounds, Shelley Thompson, and Patricia Smith-Mansfield. And congratulations to our 2018 award winners. The Victoria Irons Walsh Leadership Award acknowledges long-term leadership of state and territorial archives, and this year's recipient is Dr. Lisa Spear from the state of Arkansas. Our Advocacy for Archives Award acknowledges an individual or organization that has made significant contributions to efforts by state and local government archives to ensure the preservation and availability of the American historical record. This year's recipient was the Secretary of State from the state of Vermont, James C. Kondos, and I had the pleasure of making 2 Special President's Awards, one first to Ann Ackerson, the former CoSA Executive Director, and the second to Jim Corden of the Indiana State Archives. Next slide, please. Our 2017 CoSA Ancestry Leadership Award, the Victoria Irons Walsh Emerging Leader Travel Stipend. Usually we only make one award, and this year we had three really outstanding nominations that we thought all deserved our consideration, and we were able to fund each of those travel stipends. They went to Patsy Mitchell from the Tennessee State Library and Archives, Kathy Popovich from Illinois, and Megan Rohleder from the Kansas State Archives. And finally, I'd like to recognize our Rising Star Award. This year's recipient was Elena Perez Lozano from the New Mexico Commission of Public Records. So, well, let me just say one other thing before I turn back over the webinar. CoSA was very proud to receive the SAA Distinguished Service Award this year. It was a great honor for Barbara Teague and I to accept that award on behalf of CoSA, and I thought I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as part of my remarks here regarding awards. So with that, I'm going to, I'm sorry, I missed our leadership recipients, Zachary Jones from Alaska and Ali Rockman from the DC Office of Public Records. So thank you, Becky. I'm going to turn it over to Jody, who will give us a report on advocacy.
Thank you. Your advocacy committee has been very hard at work on several issues and events, which include, as already mentioned, the Archives on the Hill event, which was led very effectively by Jim Corridon. Jim is going to give a report on this shortly, but I wanted to take a moment to congratulate all the folks in CoSA who had a role in this. So, of course, Jim, Sarah Kuntz, Kathleen Rowe, Barbara Teague, Kay Minshew, and Becky Juleson. And if I missed anyone, I'm sorry. But it was just a great event, a collaborative effort working with SAA, RAC, and Nagara to bring together the first large-scale advocacy event for archivists. So it was just wonderful. The other thing that one of the other things we've been working on is creating the CoSA Advocacy Agenda and Action Plan for 2018-19. This is a document that takes key elements from our mission statement and then lays out the related advocacy actions for each of those elements. Those elements include advocating member needs to stakeholders, serving as a clearinghouse for information, developing advocacy messages, and working with allied professional organizations. And we have a tremendous amount of work that we're doing and will continue to do over the next year. But a draft of that document is currently with board members for review. Once their feedback is received, advocacy members will make the suggested changes and then send it out to the membership for review and comment. We hope to have that hopefully sometime early September. Likewise, the committee has been working on the Reclaiming Government Records guidance documents. I think I've mentioned these before. This is related to Replevin. Our first document is in this process is meant to educate the public about the importance of locating and returning government records that have been alienated from a government repository. The committee came up with a web page structure to provide information and links to applicable state laws. The format is a landing page containing a series of broad topics that link to specific answers and information from each of the states that are available. The topics include why should a citizen be concerned about this, what kinds of materials are missing, what have been the recovery success stories, and how do you identify a government document. So this first web page piece will be reviewed by board members, and hopefully we'll get some good comments, make those changes, and then once that feedback is received, we'll send it out to the full membership for review and comment. The ultimate goal is for us to have this outward-facing web page for public information and then tools, templates, and guidance behind the login for CoSA members. we've also formed a new subgroup that will be working on studying the possibility of a universal law for replevin. Members of that group will be Lizette Peltier, John Murray, and Tim Baker, and just more to come on that issue as we get more information. And I'd like to say at this point, anyone who's interested in working on any of these issues or have documents they'd like to share that could go up on that web page for the public or internally, please contact me. I'm at joefoley@mt.gov. Thank you. I think Lizette is next.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jody. I'd like to just give you a quick overview of the development committee's work this year. We had a very good response from the states and territories regarding dues payments. This year we're on track to have 51 of 56 states and territories make some level of dues payments for us. And then as mentioned during the calls to the states this spring, we are looking to, we're asking for a modest increase in dues for 2019, and many states felt that they would be able to make that request. In fact, a few states have already increased their dues payment for this year. Our appeals campaign, we exceeded our summer-fall campaign by $3,000 last year, and a lot of that was due to appeals for emergency fund support for damage caused to archival records by Hurricanes Harvey and Maria. The first appeal was in the fall, and that was included in the general appeal. We did a second appeal for May Day, and that was done electronically. We had a little bit of success with that, and we are very appreciative of all your donations. For May Day 2019, we plan to send a save the date announcement in April and then send out an actual appeal at the beginning of May to keep the fund sustained. And we're going to be starting sending out requests for this year's campaign. So we hope that you will be able to make a contribution to that. Moving on to sponsors and donors. This year we defined specific levels of sponsorship for both corporate sponsors and individual donors. We created 6 categories of corporate sponsorship. They range from $1,000 up to $25,000 and above. And there are 5 individual donors or circles that range from $100 to $2,500 and above. We'd like to welcome LivNova on as our newest sponsor and thank our continuing sponsors, APPX, Family Search and Ancestry. Preservica has increased its sponsorship, and we're grateful for that. We'd also like to thank Gaylord Archival. They received a special award this year for their assistance with our disaster relief efforts in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And we hear they're also lending a hand in institutions that have been affected by the wildfires in Washington State. And then, as was mentioned, David Ferrio waived the rental fee for our executive dinner, and our corporate sponsors also contributed additional funds to pay for the staff and security for that evening meeting. We're developing a number of prospects. This would include Zazio, Infolink, and I believe it's Faith or Feith. Their records content management software and consulting companies, NextScan, Belfour USA, and Interstate Restoration for disaster response, Backstage Library Works, Smarsh, and History Associates. We've also been in contact with the Northeast Documents Conservation Center about transforming our PREP document into a mobile phone app. Unfortunately, NEDCC was already involved in a Mellon-funded grant aimed at upgrading aspects of D-Plan for the arts community, so they didn't feel it was this was the right time for them to approach that, but hopefully we'll be able to address that in the near future. So in the area of disaster recovery support, Lori Foley from FEMA's Heritage Emergency National Task Force approached Barbara after Hurricane Marie struck the island, asking for assistance in getting supplies to the territorial archives. So, and apparently they were in desperate need of a HEPA vacuum and filters. So using the funds raised by the appeal for the emergency funds, we purchased that, and we were also able to get Gaylord Archival to agree to match our initial $1,000 donation, and they also agreed to handle the shipping and coordinating with FEMA to ensure that the supplies were delivered. In the Virgin Islands, former Territorial Archivist Susan Lugo was appointed as a recovery coordinator for those two islands, and we provided funding for archival supplies as part of the Smithsonian Institution's basic preparedness training that was held in the last couple of months. And Gaylord again stepped up and coordinated the shipping and supplied an additional $1,000 in supplies. And then Ancestry donated bags for packaging those supplies for the training attendees because the original supplier wasn't able to get them there in time, so we're grateful for that. And as a result, we provided 50 kits to 25 institutions from each island. The supplies were well received. If you'd like to learn more about that, Susan posted a blog on our webpage in April, so you should take a look at that. And then finally, it's been a while since we've had apparel or other paraphernalia adorned with the CoSA logo available. So the Development Committee is exploring options that will allow members to individually purchase whatever style of clothing or other selected items you'd like with the logo, rather than doing a bulk order and being stuck with a lot of inventory. So we'll provide ordering and method of payment information once everything is finalized. So that's my report, and I'd like to pass it on to Shelley.
Hello, thanks. As part of the Education and Training Committee, we are responsible for organizing the monthly webinars. And you can see that in 2017, those continued to be very popular and very helpful to CoSA members. We had over 500 attendees at the webinars in 2017. Continuing in 2018, we've got a couple more slated yet this year, so stay tuned for information on how to log in for those. The other thing, one of the bigger achievements that the Education and Training Committee did this year was the Attracting and Retaining Great Talent white paper that is available on the website if you haven't seen it or read through it yet. One of the results of that was that we were able to collaborate with San Jose State University and do a webinar with their students. And 3 of our CoSA people, I believe, were involved in that. So that was a great way to make some inroads with an IMLS program to hopefully point some people in the direction of government archives. Next slide, please. Thanks. We also, Ann Ackerson mostly did all of the work on this, decided to do a benchmark to see how CoSA compares with other very similar organizations, to see how we stack up with our communications, to make sure that there isn't some new or exciting way that we are missing out on in reaching out to our members. And we really are doing very, very well as compared to other organizations. We've got our monthly newsletters, 3 listservs, Facebook and Twitter. And if you're not on any of those and you want to follow us, you can go to the website and subscribe. Those are all. And yes, that was very important for us to make sure that we are doing very well in our communications. For 2018, for the webinars that are coming up, we've got the one today, obviously, and then in September we've got the Shrab Town Hall, and October is the last Education Training Committee webinar, and that's Mentoring Future Leaders. And then the monthly webinars will pick back up in January with a new theme. We also have shop talks that are going to be continuing for the rest of this year through September and November, and you can stay tuned. I believe there's more information on those at the end of this webinar presentation on how you can get logged in and signed up to attend those as well. And that's it. So I'd like to pass this off to Alan.
All right, thank you, Shelley. I'm going to provide an update on the SERI Access Grant projects. So I would just want to start out by thanking everyone that's participated, especially Veronica Martzel, the outgoing co-chair. I'm the new incoming co-chair, and of course, Sarah Kuntz is the continuing on as the State Archivist co-chair. And co-chairs, typically the steering committee go for a year, so those State Archivists out there who would want to take on the State Archivist co-chair a year from now will be getting, start thinking about that. I'd also like to thank the subcommittee co-chairs, Bonnie Weddle from New York, Mary Dunn from Arkansas on education programming, Advocacy and Outreach, Christian Skipper from Maryland, and Patsy Mitchell from Tennessee, and Tools and Resources, Nick Canizio from Vermont, and Alejandro Dean from Massachusetts. Can we get the next slide, please? Thank you. So we'll talk a little about activities. We've done some educational webinars this year. And we'll be having webinars coming up again after this month. We also have 10-10 Day in October coming up in October for 10-10. So look forward to information coming out about that shortly. The Advocacy and Outreach of the SERI Committee on Advocacy and Outreach, they're working on spotlight articles which appear on the blog, and also working on social media postings such as Twitter and keeping that going, along with the 10-10 Day. So I want to thank that group for all the work that they've been doing on those and it's social media. Also, the Tools and Resources Subcommittee continues to work on the Resource Center, making sure links stay up to date, as well as asking all of you to send in your resources. We greatly appreciate all the resources you send in. The more resources we have in there, the better the Resource Center will be. So keep those coming in, or feel free to ask us questions if you're not sure how to do it or what what should go there. But we're looking for things like workflows, policies, procedures, any sorts of those types of documents that you're willing to share and put out there. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the IMLS Access Grant. It began October 1st. We're working with the National Governors Association and other partners such as the National Association of Secretaries of State, Chief Information Officers of state library agencies, on sort of things that will help us engage with them, as well as help their membership understand electronic records preservation issues and other sorts of electronic records issues. So far we've put together several management briefs for National Governors Association, which they're currently reviewing and looking at. We will also have a webinar with them in the next week here. Also reviewing the manual and turning those more into briefs, because nobody really wants to read a long manual. And as it says, the webinar on August 28th. With the State Chief Information Officers, we have a digital preservation playbook, which has been drafted and is off to NASCIO, and look for that to come out sometime in September. And with Secretary of State and COSA, we are working with them to identify potential things that are of interest to them and to us, and especially Secretary of State, we're waiting till after the election season. As far as the research agenda, we're partnering with Preservica. So look toward, we will be sending out in the next few months here, seeking additional information to survey legacy data holdings, especially at agencies especially in key agencies in your state. So look forward to some surveys coming out. One sort of trying to gauge where to look, and then a larger one to the various agencies in your state and so forth. So look forward to that information coming out in the next few months. Next slide, please. Oh, and I'm going to pass it off to back to John for the sustainability plan. Thank you.
So as Vice President, I serve to be over the Sustainability Plan Committee, and that committee continued its work after the plan was approved in Boise. And really, I have to tip my hat to Ann Ackerson because she took that document and converted it over into a strategic plan based on kind of the three legs of what that plan included, with research and education and advocacy. And I think that right now there were a lot of good ideas discussed in D.C., including the observer survey that was just referenced. On the research side, we're not really, doing as much in that area in the past as maybe we were going to be in the future. And we appreciate in advance all the support for State Archives and helping us to gather data that would be useful for us all there. Under the education and advocacy areas, I think that those committees are already robust and doing great things, and so I look forward to what those groups produce in the future. But from a sustainability standpoint, it seems to be that we're doing many of the right things that came out of the sustainability plan from a functional standpoint, and so we just need to continue to do those kinds of things. On the next slide, I put this in here because of two things. One of those was in the call to the states. We actually asked about did the state archives believe that they would be able to support the moderate slight increase in dues, and 76% of the states said that they would be able to, or at least try to be able to, increase their dues. And we know with the other 24%, that many of them are not even able to pay any dues or not able to pay full dues at this time. And so we understand those situations, those individual situations, but I think it's encouraging from a sustainability standpoint that a vast majority of the state archives who are able will be able to increase their dues with that. Also with the calls to the states, it gave us a lot of I'd say validation in what we're doing right now, to know that we're sort of, focusing in the right areas and doing the right things with our research and our education and our advocacy. And so we've listed some of the things that you all are looking for on this slide with research, and like I said, a number of things were discussed at Washington, D.C., and we're looking forward to the future. Not only from a sustainability plan and an action plan, but also for the things that we started with, like the Archives on the Hill initiative that we were the leaders in this year. So I'm going to turn to Jim to talk a little bit about that. Jim Porter.
Thank you, John. I want to talk a little bit about Archives on the Hill, and I want to thank both Tim and Jody for mentioning it, and I appreciate the positive comments you provided. Archives on the Hill, as they mentioned, was last week, August 14th, Tuesday, and we basically brought 65 people up onto Capitol Hill from all 4 national organizations, NAGARA, RAC, SAA, and CoSA, and met with the offices of about 45 senators and House members, all of whom sit on either the Appropriations Subcommittee for NARA or the Oversight Committee for NARA in the 2 chambers, the House and the Senate. In doing so, a couple of firsts. One, it's the first time we've ever organized all 4 organizations to work together on an advocacy effort, so that was a big victory for us. And secondly, it was the first time we really approached broadly, probably since the PAR efforts, of pushing an agenda for the archives community. Some of the big issues that we discussed while we were up there included archives funding, just general federal funding for archives, and then specifically we talked about NARA and NHPRC funding. There are efforts afoot to have NHPRC reauthorized, which means that Congress, in theory, will adopt legislation that makes sure that NHPRC exists. Right now, the reauthorization for, or the authorization for NHPRC to be part of the budget expired 10 years ago, which is part of the reason every year we have to fight for NHPRC to be put back in the budget. This year we've been very successful in our efforts, and CoSA has received direct praise from the National Archives for our efforts to get NHPRC in the budget. For the first time in probably 6, 7, 8 years, the House of Representatives actually put $6 million in its original budget for NHPRC, and the Senate did the same. So for 2019, NHPRC looks to be safe, less some disaster that might happen. We also talked a little bit about IMLS while we were out there, because I know there's a lot of archives that get both IMLS and NEH funding, so they're both mentioned. And then lastly, we talked to congressional staff about electronic records. So this is the first time we've done this. We have a meeting in about 2 weeks with members of the 4 organizations to talk about next steps. We certainly don't want to wait 5 years, which is the next time the 4 groups will be in Washington for our annual meeting. So I suspect that what's going to happen, hopefully, is that in January we start looking at doing some district meetings with some of these key players, because January is when the budget is being developed, and it's probably the most opportune time for us to make inroads in trying to actually see increases in some of the budget numbers for NARA and for archive support. So as Tim and Jody mentioned, it was a highly successful event. I should also mention not only were those 4 organizations involved, but I think nearly if not all of the entire board of CoSA participated that day, and so greatly appreciate their efforts. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Barbara.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone for joining us today to catch up on what we did last week at the annual meeting in D.C. One of the innovations that we tried this year was expanding the work session that we usually have into sort of a longer day event called the Great Ideas Exchange Day. And this grew out of some conversations with the National Archives based on the symposium that we had last year to discuss NHPRC and the Shrabs, because we also thought that CoSA needed to develop a better relationship and information sharing and cooperation with the National Archives, not just with NHPRC based on the Shrabs, because the State Archives have so much in common with the work that the National Archives is doing, and we look to NARA to lead us in many areas. So what we did was we looked at some discussion topics where we could concentrate on issues that we might be able to cooperate on more in the future, or that were innovative, or that would just be really interesting. So we had 3 sessions on different topics with a federal case study and then a state case study, and those case studies are now on the CoSA website under reports and surveys, so you can see the 5 case studies that we have. We had 2 from appraisal, 2 from the electronic records section, and then we have Alabama's crowdsourcing case study. We don't really have a case study from the History Hub, which was NARA's really interesting crowdsourcing and reference sharing site, but we have the presentation that the Alabama State Archives and the NARA staff from History Hub made last month or sometime this summer in our first CoSA NARA webinar. We're going to have quarterly webinars based on some of these same topics. We got some feedback from you there at the meeting about what we could talk about in the future. So we'll have more webinars coming. May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And speaking of ongoing NARA and CoSA communication and collaboration, one of the things we're going to work on is developing these topics for webinars, and we intend to have them quarterly. The first one was very popular, that had the crowdsourcing presentation that we heard a little bit more about at the Great Ideas Exchange Day. I don't know if people really thought that was a great thing, but we had like almost 100 people to attend that webinar. So if there are other topics that you have in mind, please let us know as we continue to develop what we're going to do in the future. You know, this is experimental. We're going to do the webinars. We've also, NARA is interested in getting State Archives to sign up for the traveling exhibit about the 19th Amendment called Rightfully Hers is the name of their exhibit. And if you didn't get the email about that earlier this week, let me know and I can send that to you. Because we think, you know, there's more to cooperation than having joint webinars. We're also looking at working on some projects together, looking at best practices, this idea of sharing the traveling exhibit. So if you have any feedback, please do let me know. And this is a really great day, and thanks to, you know, David Ferrio being very supportive of this effort to have NARA and CoSA communicate and collaborate on a more extensive level. And it obviously could not have happened without Meg Phillips, who's NARA's External Affairs Liaison. But if you do have any feedback, do let me know. If you have any ideas, I'm very interested to hear them, because we're looking at what we might do next year based on what we did this year with the Great Ideas Exchange Day. You know, we don't want to make people sit in a room for 20 hours thinking and talking, but we really would like to find a way to share information with each other. And with that, I will pass it to President John Dugan. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So I am going to just talk briefly, because we're almost out of time, with questions for what I see in the future. And as I said in DC, I really think that the focus of the next year is just going to be on continued momentum, to build on the successes of what we've been doing the last few years. And again, I want to thank Tim and Barbara and Ann and the CoSA staff and the committee chairs past and present, because I think that if we can continue the momentum we have in the areas we've been working, I think we will continue to grow the organization, and I'm excited about that future. I think my focus is really going to be on practical progress, advancing and investigating different tools that we can all use, whether that deals with analog records or electronic records or whatever it may be. I think that you know, our committee structure is such that we're going to continue to build those tools that we need to make each of our institutions successful. I would thank those institutions that have already been giving SERI and other areas strong staff support from the State Archives. I think that's going to be important as well moving forward with surveys and other things that we're looking at doing in the research elements and the education and other areas too. And it's already been mentioned, but I think continuing to build strong partnerships with the folks at NAG and NAS and NASIO and COSLA and all of those groups is going to be very, very important for us moving forward as well. So I think that at this time, I just would encourage us all to work cooperatively together and open the floor for questions either in the chat box or comments from others that are on the call.
John, this is Barbara. I wanted to ask you about since you're chairing the Archives and Records Management Report, the State of State Records this year, I thought you might want to mention that the survey for that will be going out.
Absolutely. There is a committee looking at the survey, and if you have ideas for specific questions that you want, please get those to Barbara. So she can get those to all the committee members for that. It seems to be that we have a love-hate relationship. We love the data and the value that we get from aggregated data once the survey is done, but we all hate long surveys. And so the committee is going to look at trying to make it as concise as possible and only collect data that we can and will use. So, but we're going to look back over the survey questions in the next month or so. So please get any ideas that you might have to Barbara so we can act on those.
And if you do have any questions for any of us, you could just add them to the chat box and we'll be able to address them if anyone has any questions. Gayla, your hand is raised. If you have a question, just type it into the chat box. I'm not really sure we know how to unmute you, or I don't know how to unmute you.
You may not be able to find the chat box either with this new interface.
Right. Right, that's true.
I think it's the middle button, if you can get that to come up on the bottom of your screen.
The middle button, that's showing at least on my screen, which looks like a cloud.
Right, it's bluish, it's a blue color. Or just, you know, if there's a question that you have and you can't find the chat box, email me anytime and I can pass it on to whoever we need to pass it on to. Okay, I guess since we don't really have questions, we could just go on to our next section with announcements.
Yes, and this is Mary Margaret, and I'll be glad to come back in for that after hearing about a lot of really good information that everyone had to share today on so many activities that are going on. This is, as we mentioned before, the August member webinar series of the series, and we have 2 more scheduled. Tune in on September 27th for the Shrab Town Hall, and on October 25th, the winners of the CoSA Ancestry Leadership Award will be giving their presentations at the Mentoring Future Leaders webinar to conclude the member webinars for the year. So I think both of those are really going to be good. You will be getting email notices about those coming up to encourage you to register for those. Then we'll go on to the next slide and talk about the next part of our upcoming webinars, our Shop Talk webinars from our major corporate sponsors. Last fall, we had that with Family Search, so this year we're picking up our other major corporate sponsors. September 13th, we've already seen notes going out about this. We want to call that to your attention. We're going to have the Ancestry Shop Talk webinar, and I think that's really going to be interesting. October 16th will be Preservica, and November 15th will be Apex. And so I think each one of those will offer good programs from those sponsors. We'll go on to the next slide. And of course, we need to thank all our sponsors and funders for helping us put these webinars on this year. Ancestry, Family Search, Apex, Preservica, LibNova, Space Saver, Gaylord Archival, NHPRC, and IMLS, the latter 2 being our federal sponsors, and we appreciate all of their support. The next slide will show us the ways to stay connected and informed. We heard references about reports and other things. Don't forget about the CoSA website. That's a good place to check those out. Also the Resource Center, which is a section of that website. We have active social media on the Twitter handle @StateArchivist, and our Facebook page, facebook.com/Council of State Archivists. And so we encourage you to keep up with us that way. And we'll go to one more slide while we're talking about information and staying connected. We really appreciate your feedback. So as we continue to plan webinars, we really like hearing what you found valuable about these webinars, any other comments that you would like to make. After you exit the webinar, you will automatically be taken to that online webinar evaluation. Please take just a minute or two, it doesn't take long, to complete the survey and help us plan future webinars. So on behalf of everyone who was presenting today, and really appreciate everyone being here and sharing all your reports, we want to thank you for being with us today and look forward. The next time we'll be with you will be on September 13th for the Ancestry Shop Talk webinar. So thanks and have a good day.